Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
In the 1920s, a series of experiments were conducted at the Hawthorne Works factory in Chicago. Researchers wanted to understand what conditions improved worker productivity. They changed the lighting. Output went up. They changed it back. Output went up again. They adjusted the break schedules. Output went up. They changed other things. Output kept going up regardless of what was changed. The conclusion was uncomfortable and fascinating in equal measure. The workers were not responding to the lighting or the brakes or any of the specific conditions being altered. They were responding to the fact that they were being observed. The awareness of being watched changed how they performed. Not because they were dishonest or performing falsely, but because attention, even their own attention directed deliberately at their performance, raised the standard of what they produced. This single finding from nearly 100 years ago contains more practical wisdom about human performance than most of what has been published about productivity since. You perform differently when you are being watched. The question worth sitting with is what happens when you turn that observation on yourself. The Hawthorne effect reveals something about excuses that most people never examine. The excuse lives in the unobserved space. It thrives in the private moment where no one is watching, and the choice between the full effort and the comfortable retreat can be made without external consequence. The excuse needs the darkness of the unexamined moment to survive. Shine a light on it, and it changes character immediately. What felt like a reasonable response to genuine circumstances starts to look different when it is being observed closely. The tiredness that justified skipping the session looks different when it is written down honestly next to the record of what the session was supposed to produce. The business of the day that crowded out the important work looks different when it is listed alongside the actual time spent on things that were neither urgent nor important. The Hawthorne effect tells you that the observer changes the behavior. Become your own most rigorous observer, and the behavior that the excuses were protecting becomes very difficult to maintain. Most people observe themselves selectively. They pay close attention to the areas of their performance where they are already doing well and apply a much softer gaze to the areas where the gap between intention and behavior is widest. This is not a conscious strategy. It is the natural operation of a mind that finds discomfort in honest self-assessment and has developed an efficient system for minimizing that discomfort while maintaining the self-image of someone who is trying. The Hawthorne effect applied deliberately disrupts this selective observation. When you commit to tracking the actual behavior across all the areas that matter, when the record exists in writing and is reviewed with the same honesty you would bring to observing someone else, the selective blindness becomes much harder to maintain. The areas you have been not looking at closely start revealing what the softer gaze was covering. And what they revealed is almost never as devastating as the avoidance suggested it would be. It is usually just honest. And honest is the only starting point that leads anywhere real. The act of tracking your own behavior changes your behavior before the results of the tracking are even reviewed. This is the Hawthorne effect operating in its purest form in your own life. When you know that tonight you will sit down and write honestly in a log what you actually did with the day feels different while it is happening. The choice to avoid the work carries a new weight because it is no longer a private choice that disappears into the unobserved past. It is a choice that will be recorded and looked at later by the same person making it now. That future accountability changes the present decision in a way that almost nothing else does. Not because you are afraid of the record, but because the record makes the choice visible in a way it was not before. Visible choices are made differently than invisible ones. The excuse that slips easily through the unobserved moment meets real resistance in the moment, where the observer is present and paying attention. The journal is the simplest and most powerful implementation of the Hawthorne effect available to you, and almost nobody uses it with sufficient honesty to access its full benefit. The journal that records the wins and the efforts, and the progress is pleasant but incomplete. The journal that also records the avoided work, the accepted excuse, the gap between the intention stated yesterday and the behavior produced today. That journal is a tool that changes the game. Not because self-criticism produces growth, but because accurate self-knowledge produces the specific kind of discomfort that honest people use as fuel. When you write down that the important work was skipped for the third consecutive day, you cannot also maintain the story that you are someone who shows up consistently for the important work. The story and the evidence are in the same book, and they contradict each other plainly. Something has to give. Usually it is the behavior rather than the story, because the story is what you live inside, and a story that does not match the evidence becomes intolerable to a person with genuine standards. The public commitment is the Hawthorne effect scaled beyond the private journal. When the goal is stated to another person, when the commitment is made in a space where someone else holds the record of what was promised, the performance changes in the same way the factory workers' performance changed when the researchers showed up with clipboards. The observation raises the standard. The accountability partner who receives the weekly report on whether the commitments were kept is not primarily there to help or encourage. They are there to observe, and the observation is the thing that changes the behavior. This is why the person who announces their goal publicly and then fails to follow through feels worse than the person who kept the goal private and failed quietly. The public failure has witnesses. The private failure can be softened by the absence of external observation. Use this mechanism deliberately. Put your commitments somewhere that creates genuine accountability, and watch how the behavior shifts in response to the presence of the observer. The Hawthorne effect also explains why the excuse sounds most convincing in the moments when you are least observed. The 6 a.m. decision about whether to get up and do the work is made in the dark with no audience. The afternoon decision about whether to push through the difficult section or find something easier to do happens in the private space of a room where no one is tracking the outcome. The evening decision about whether to review the day honestly or dissolve into entertainment happens without any external pressure to choose the harder option. These are the moments where the excuses are strongest, because these are the moments where the observer is absent. The practice of introducing an observer into these moments, whether through a tracking system, a commitment to someone else, or the simple discipline of writing down the choice immediately after it is made, applies the Hawthorne effect to the exact moments where it is most needed. The dark moments get lit, and the excuses that lived in the darkness lose their grip. The work you have been putting in is not the work you are capable of, and somewhere in your honest self you already know this. Not because you are lazy in the way the word is used as an insult, but because the full effort, the genuinely uncomfortable, sustained maximum effort that a meaningful goal requires, has not been applied yet. There have been good days. Days where the work felt real and the progress was visible, and the version of yourself that is capable of building the life you want showed up fully. And there have been far more days where that version was replaced by a more comfortable one. a version that did the minimum required to maintain the feeling of being someone who is working without doing the actual work that changes things. The gap between those two versions is not talent. It is not circumstance, it is effort. And effort is the one variable in the entire equation that belongs entirely to you, that cannot be taken from you, that no external condition can reduce without your permission. Hard work has been softened into something polite in a culture that has developed an enormous infrastructure of justification for not doing it. The productivity content tells you to optimize the system before you grind. The wellness content tells you to protect your energy before you push. The mindset content tells you to examine your beliefs before you act. And none of that is wrong exactly, but all of it can be used, and is used constantly, as a layer of sophisticated delay between the person and the work that the person already knows needs to be done. At some point, the reading about the work, and the thinking about the work, and the preparing to do the work has to end, and the work has to start. The unglamorous, unoptimized, imperfect, early morning version of the work before the system is built and the beliefs are examined and the energy is perfectly managed. The work done badly and consistently beats the work planned perfectly and never started in every game that has ever been played. Every person who built something real had a list of reasons why it should not have been possible and built it anyway. Not after the reasons became invalid, while the reasons were still fully present and completely accurate. The resources were genuinely limited. The circumstances were genuinely difficult. The opposition was genuinely real. The odds were genuinely not favorable. None of that changed before the work began. The work began inside those conditions, and the work eventually changed the conditions through the compounding of consistent effort, applied in the right direction over a long enough period. The conditions were not the variable. The effort was the variable. And the person who waited for better conditions before committing full effort waited for something that only the effort could have produced. The conditions do not improve and then enable the work. The work produces the improved conditions. That sequence never reverses no matter how long the waiting continues. The truth about excuses is that they are almost never about the thing they claim to be about. The excuse about not having enough time is almost never about time. It is about priority. The time exists. It is being spent on something else that was chosen over the work. Naming that honestly is uncomfortable because it removes the excuse and replaces it with a choice, and choices carry responsibility in a way that circumstances do not. The excuse about not having enough money is almost never purely about money. There is almost always something that could be started with what is available. Some version of the first step that does not require the full resources the finished version will eventually need. The excuse about not being ready is almost never about readiness. It is about the fear of attempting something and discovering that the attempt falls short of the vision held for it. All of these are real feelings. None of them are the thing they are being called. Accountability is the thing that excuses are designed to avoid, and the avoidance is expensive in a specific and measurable way. The person who holds themselves accountable to the outcome of their effort gets honest feedback from every result. The work produced a specific result. The result tells them something about the work. They adjust, and the next effort is better informed than the one before it. The person who excuses their way out of accountability never receives that feedback because every result gets explained rather than examined. The failure was external. The shortfall was circumstantial. The gap was someone else's fault. And so the same errors are never corrected, and the same ceiling is never broken, and the same level of performance repeats across years of genuine effort that produces no genuine development, because the feedback loop was never allowed to close. Accountability is not punishment. It is the information system that turns effort into improvement. Shut it down with excuses and the effort spins in place. The relationship between discomfort and progress is not complicated. The discomfort is the progress. The burning in the muscle is the muscle getting stronger. The difficulty of the paragraph that will not come together is the writing getting better. The awkwardness of the sales conversation that has not yet become natural is the skill of connecting with people developing. None of the progress exists somewhere ahead of the discomfort waiting to be collected after the uncomfortable phase is survived. The discomfort is the development happening in real time, which means the person who runs from discomfort is running from the exact process that would have produced what they wanted. The excuse that arrives in the moment of discomfort and offers a way to stop is not protecting you from something harmful. It is protecting the current level from being exceeded. It is the ceiling maintaining itself. The only way through it is through the discomfort that the excuse was built to exit. Effort compounds the same way everything else compounds, and the person who has not yet experienced this does not yet have access to the understanding that would make starting easy. The reward system inside you was built for a different world. It was built for a world where pleasure was rare and effort was required to reach it, where the sweet thing required the hunt, and the hunt required sustained physical and mental effort across hours or days before the reward arrived. The rarity of the reward and the effort required to reach it meant that the dopamine release, when it finally came, was proportionate to the genuine achievement it represented. Food after the hunt, rest after the labor, connection after the isolation of necessary solo effort. These were the rewards the system was calibrated for, and the calibration made sense inside the world that built it. The system worked as designed for most of human history. Then the world changed faster than the biology could follow. The effort to reward ratio collapsed. The sweet thing became available without the hunt. The rest became available without the labor. The stimulation became available without any of the conditions that were supposed to precede it. The system did not adapt to the new world. It simply began misfiring inside it. Cheap dopamine is everywhere, and it costs nothing in the currency the brain was designed to pay for reward. No effort required. No sustained discomfort endured. No meaningful goal pursued across time and difficulty before the pleasure center activates. The scroll produces it. The notification produces it. The snack produces it. The short video and the quick win and the instant validation all produce it at a volume and a frequency that the system was never built to handle. And the system responds to this flood the way any system responds to overload, which is by raising the threshold. The brain that is constantly saturated with low-effort dopamine raises the bar for what registers as pleasurable. Yesterday's reward becomes today's baseline. The thing that produced a strong response last week produces a weaker one this week. The threshold keeps climbing, and the cheap sources keep feeding it, and the things that actually require effort and produce genuine satisfaction start to feel like not enough before they even begin. The connection between the dopamine system and motivation is the part that turns this from a lifestyle concern into a life-altering problem. Dopamine is not primarily the pleasure chemical. It is the anticipation chemical. It is the drive chemical. It is the fuel that gets you moving toward a goal before the reward is reached. When the system is healthy and the threshold is calibrated correctly, the anticipation of a meaningful reward produces the motivation to do the difficult work required to reach it. When the system is flooded with cheap, constant reward, the anticipation mechanism breaks. The brain is already saturated. There is nothing for the anticipation of the meaningful goal to compete with. The difficult work that used to feel worth starting feels pointless before the first step, because the system that generates the drive to begin it has been dulled by the constant noise of cheap alternatives. This is why the person who spends the morning on cheap dopamine finds the afternoon work almost impossible to begin. The drive system was spent before the work ever received it. The modern environment is a dopamine trap with no visible walls. The trap does not feel like a trap from the inside, because every element of it was designed to feel like a choice freely made in pursuit of genuine pleasure. The platform that keeps you scrolling was built by some of the most sophisticated behavioral engineers in the history of technology. Every element of its design was optimized to produce the maximum dopamine response with the minimum resistance to continued engagement. The variable reward schedule, which is the same mechanism that makes gambling so difficult to stop, was not borrowed from psychology accidentally. It was deployed deliberately to exploit the exact vulnerability in the human reward system that makes intermittent, unpredictable reward more compelling than consistent, predictable reward. You are not weak for being caught in the trap. The trap was built by people who understood your biology better than you understood it yourself and used that understanding to capture your attention and sell it to the highest bidder. Fixing the reward system is not about permanent deprivation. The goal is not to become someone who never experiences easy pleasure or who treats every moment of rest and enjoyment as a moral failure requiring correction. That version of self-denial is its own kind of dysfunction. The goal is recalibration, returning the threshold to a level where the meaningful reward produces a meaningful response, where the satisfaction of finishing a hard piece of work registers as genuinely pleasurable rather than merely adequate, where the connection experienced after a real conversation with a real person feels richer than the shallow engagement of the social feed, where the body after physical effort feels better than the body after the same time spent in passive consumption. None of these things require the cheap dopamine to be eliminated entirely. They require it to be reduced enough that the genuine rewards have room to register at the level they deserve. The silence between the cheap hits is where the recalibration happens. The practical starting point is a deliberate reset period where the cheap dopamine sources are significantly reduced for long enough that the threshold begins to drop back toward the level where real things produce real responses. The research suggests that meaningful neurological adjustment begins within 2 to 4 weeks of significant reduction in the cheap sources. The first few days of this period are the hardest because the brain reads the absence of the constant stimulation as a deficit and generates the restless, uncomfortable feeling that most people immediately interpret as a signal to resume the consumption. This feeling is not a signal that something is wrong. It is the signal that the recalibration has begun. The discomfort is the threshold dropping. The boredom is the system recalibrating to a level where ordinary things start to produce a response again. Sitting in that discomfort without reaching for the cheap source is the entire practice. It is simple. It is not easy. And it is one of the most valuable things a person can do for every other area of their life.